the plant manager was all excited. He said, this is the best results we've ever had. And it's so great. And all I did was gather feedback and listen to what they had to say. And it wasn't hard for me to do. This was so great. Everybody's excited. And then guess what happened? The company fired me.
Uh-oh.
Because they realized that with all these people having more knowledge and changing their behavior, they were going to have to do the same thing. And they didn't want to. And this plant manager felt a lot better about the way he was running things. His people were happier. Everybody had now a cutting edge job skill that they didn't have before that also made them more valuable to the company. And if the company didn't recognize it, they could go somewhere else because now they have that skill, right? So they didn't lose, but they did lose because really the whole company could have gone to that next level.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. Hello, Rebel HR listeners. Extremely excited for the conversation today. With us, we have Marie Gervais. She has written a book that was just recently released called The Spirit of Work. It's currently available wherever books are sold. We are going to be talking all about the book. Dr. Marie Gervais is the CEO of Shift Management Incorporated, specializing in helping people grow into supervisory and managerial positions, build their leadership confidence and skills to support their teams in meeting business objectives effectively. We are going to dig into that. But first of all, I want to welcome you, Marie. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the podcast. I'm honored.
So I am just kind of waiting on the edge of my seat because we had a little bit of a conversation here before I hit record about your book, The Spirit of Work. And you mentioned that you had sent this to a couple HR professionals and they said, hey, this is a little bit too disruptive. And that's what we're all about here. So I'm going to start with that lead in, and I want to ask and maybe start with the first question. What prompted you to write your book, The Spirit of Work?
Well, I am always looking for cross-cutting themes and for trends for the future of work. And basically, I saw a new trend coming, and that trend is that it's a holistic approach to HR that involves the individual, community, and the organization, and that approaches work from a perspective that is spiritual, scientific, and business at the same time. So that was what I wanted to do. It took me 2 years to research and write it, and I did have an experience where I went to Rebel HR. What's the name of that? We just talked about it. The name of
Disrupt HR.
Disrupt. That's right. Disrupt HR. I went to several of their events. I really liked them, and I spoke to the organizer, and she said to me, "Oh, you should definitely submit a proposal because we'd love to feature you." And I did submit the proposal about the book that I had not yet written, and she said, "No, this is too far out for us." But I don't think it is anymore because that was pre-COVID, and once people went through what they went through in COVID, their worlds changed and their mindsets changed, and they realized that things were not the same as they were before. And I think a manager who manages electricians said it really succinctly. He said, "I used to manage electricians, and now I play psychologist, and I'm not qualified for that." And so he said, "I've never before had to deal with people's emotions and have to calm them down. They're electricians. They just did their job. And I have to calm them down. I have to listen to people. I have to figure out what's going on in their lives. And I have to talk to them about work-life balance. And I never had to do this before. I'm totally unprepared." And so that I thought, well, I need to do something that will help people be more prepared. So I've already looked at things from an emotional regulation perspective, but I wanted to add in all the other parts too. So inside the book, we've got 5 themes. The first theme is bring your soul to work, and it's completely multi-denominational. It's about texts from all the sacred traditions. So it takes texts about work and about working in workplace from all these different sacred traditions that are really fascinating. I learned a lot when I researched it. So there's that. And so bring your soul to work, bring your heart to work, bring your body to work, bring your mind to work, and you are bringing your community to work. Do you know who you're bringing? So those are the 5 themes.
Absolutely. So, it's a fascinating topic, and it's the thing that you mentioned about COVID. I think is it really resonates with me, because I, before COVID, would probably have been in the school of thought of, yeah, I don't know how much all that touchy feely kind of spirituality, how much that actually should come into the workplace, right? But what we've seen over the last few years is the work has been thrust into many people's homes, and you can't separate the entire person from the workplace, even physically, anymore, like we used to be able to do for so many jobs pre-COVID. And it has prompted, a conversation. And in my perspective, I've changed my thinking on that, where I do think it's really important to be more aware of that. But I will say the same thing that your leader of electricians said, which is, I'm totally unqualified to deal with some of these topics, especially when we start talking about things like soul and spirituality. I've done my best to be an amateur psychologist, as many HR professionals tend to get thrust into. But you throw spirituality in there, and that's a whole nother, I can't be a spiritual advisor at work.
No.
So I'm with you on this topic. Like for me, I think this makes a lot of sense. So as
it's about purpose, though. If you think about spirituality as being about purpose, and and the key questions in life, like, who am I? What am I doing here? What's my purpose? Is this the career I should be in? What's my future? Those are all spirituality questions, and it helps people get their mind around it when they think about it that way. And the book is not just another book about mindfulness, although mindfulness is really important, and I do talk about it in the book, because it can be too much navel gazing if people are only always focusing on themselves and their own feelings and their own needs, and it becomes really self-centered. So, putting yourself in the perspective of how can you be of service to everybody else there, and that's how you develop your talents, is another aspect of spirituality that hasn't been used in the workplace much. So people are saying, "Gimme, gimme," and employers are going, "Well, how much do I have to give?" And it's a very unbalanced and unsafe way to live. So in the workplace. So if you're thinking, well, what can I do to make this workplace better? And how can I contribute? And how can my contribution be valued? And how can I value other people's contributions? That's all the spirit. So it's a little bit more approachable when you think about it that way. But when you look at this text from the world religions, it's amazing. Like, for example, there are like nine tenets in Hinduism that have to do with work. And one of them, which really surprised me, I had to think about it for a long time, is packing up. Packing up, which is the idea that when you finish something, you let it go and move on. How many people hold on to some story that happened 10 years ago because they haven't packed it up? They have to keep revisiting that same old thing and reinforcing the negative neural pathways, right? So just that, each time I run into one of those, I go, wow, if we even just did one of these things in the workplace, the whole workplace would be transformed.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
I guarantee you, many of our listeners, myself included, we're thinking, yep, I know that person that's still hanging on to that thing from 10 years ago.
No kidding. 10 years ago, so-and-so said that to me, and they don't work here anymore, but I'm still mad about it.
Yeah. That is so fascinating. I love how you put that, because I think we hear the word spirituality, we hear the word soul, And there's, depending upon somebody's upbringing and kind of their, inherent biases, there's certain connotations with that. But by labeling it as purpose, it's fascinating, because for me, I hear the word purpose and immediately I think of, well, work should provide a purpose for people, right? It should be a place where people feel like they're contributing. And that's also been a really strong correlation to somebody enjoying their work and being engaged in their work and staying at their job for longer. And so I think, it's really interesting to kind of make that connection and think about that in a little bit of a different context than we have traditionally. Was that part of the goal with the book?
Yeah, it is. And it has some models and some easy to use, easy to imagine, but then apply not necessarily the same way, themes that can be used right away. So one of them is the idea of having, thinking that what am I saying, doing, and thinking? Is it soul enhancing or soul diminishing? So soul enhancing promotes creativity, inclusivity. It encourages people to want to listen, to be curious about each other, to do things in an excellent way. Soul diminishing would be the opposite. It'd be judgmental. It'd be rude. It's all about what I want and I don't care about you. And so if you start thinking about everything you're thinking, saying, and doing in that context, it really affects the way you act at work. So kind of goes along with this, the famous THINK acronym, so think, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? So that it's that kind of an idea that if you think, if what I'm about to say or do, let me just suspend judgment for a second. Is this going to be soul enhancing or not? And then you may or may not choose to do something that's positive. But the more you think about it, the more likely you are to autocorrect your behavior. So that's one piece. The other one is this S.W.E.L acronym. So S.W.E.L stands for safety, safety, well-being, encouragement, and learning. So if you think about everything in terms of safety, how safe does it feel for a new employee to come into our organization? How safe do existing staff feel welcoming a new person in? How safe is our product? How safe is our service? From birth to death cycle, all the people that are involved with it, is everybody in it safe? Is the planet safe after we finish with this? Right? So if you just think about that, it's going to revolutionize everything. And then once you start thinking about safety, then the next piece is well-being. And well-being isn't like gym memberships and a pool in your manufacturing plant. It's like, how do I feel like I belong and I can contribute here? And how do I encourage other people so that they can feel that way too? So then that's a whole new take on well-being that it's really, it doesn't involve any money. It just involves a shift in thinking. And then after that, replacing a culture of criticism with a culture of encouragement. It's just, criticism is just rampant everywhere. And I used to, when I did live presentations, I used to do a muscle test with anyone in the audience who wanted to do it, a kinesiology muscle test. I'd say, everybody in the audience think is mean things about this person. I'm going to try and push their arm down. First, I'd just test their arm so that they could see that the person did have an arm. It was functioning properly. And then next, I'd think mean things, and the person's arm would go down and there was nothing they could do. I usually ask someone who is the strongest, most buff person in the audience to come and volunteer to do it. And then afterwards, I say, now think all the things you really love about this person. And their arm was super strong. I'd hang on it and dangle my feet off of their arm, and they'd go, "Whoa, I didn't think I had that much muscle." So the way you think about people affects their performance. So that if you think encouraging thoughts about people, or if you go, wait a minute, I'm feeling judgmental. What's missing? I'm probably missing sleep. Oh, I didn't have lunch. Or, instead of thinking what's wrong with that person. And then what could I say that would be encouraging, sincerely encouraging? Encouragement really builds capacity in an organization. And then if you're always learning, and if the organization is always learning, you can come into the S.W.E.L model at any point. Learning, encouragement, well-being, or safety. Either way, it's going to make a big difference in the way people view each other at work. So I always like to start with safety, though, because I think you can go to so many places with safety. Intellectually safe, culturally safe, racially safe. Yeah. It goes beyond all the ideas of just, being compliant.
Absolutely. So I am curious, you mentioned that there's, five different, five different aspects of the book: the soul, the heart, the body, mind, and the community. Is there a reason that you put them in that order? Is that like a foundational order that you found in some of your work, or kind of walk me through those, how you kind of derived those five?
Well, I think the first one, bring your soul to work, is the most disruptive. So I wanted to start with that. And then what happens at the end with you are bringing your community to work, but do you really know who you're bringing? Because it talks about our unconscious biases and how to make adjustments to that. So then that's also hard hitting. And the one that I think people would have the least trouble with, but on a cognitive level, but the most trouble doing is bring your body to work, because we just drive ourselves to, into illness all the time and pride ourselves in, not getting enough sleep and not eating regularly and, and then add addictive substances to that. And, 30% of the workplace is under the influence of some substance at all times, and it's probably increasing. So, because that's 5 years old. People can't be at their healthy body best. So I go through everything starting with breathing or all the way up to what should you eat and how should you be if you're working night shift. So, and there's a lot of research on that. So it was really interesting to research it. It seems like they're thinking more body focused, but they're still in their minds when they're doing it. They're not actually moving to action. So, and they often can't because they have a lot of beliefs associated with how they treat themselves. So that piece, like I thought that would be the easiest one for people to get into, but once they do get into it, they'll have the hardest time doing it. I actually think the other things that are harder to get your mind around are easier to do.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I think there's been a lot of dialogue around, what we would consider to be like traditional wellness, right? Like, take care of yourself, eat right, drink enough water, get up from your desk, on a regular basis, don't sit too much, all those sorts of things. It's really easy to know what to do.
Yeah.
Easy to say it. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean that it actually gets done.
Because knowledge does not change behavior.
Right.
It never has.
Yeah. So how do we, as an HR professional, kind of understanding these, and first of all, I think I'm definitely with you on these five, and I can think of personal stories with each one of these five where I've seen examples where somebody has been, on the good side of that and somebody's been on the bad side of that. And you can kind of think through like, well, if somebody's, body is not where it needs to be, i.e. they're under the influence of a substance, or they have, they're struggling with, health issues. They can't be as effective at work. Same thing for somebody bringing implicit biases into work and, not even realizing that they're conducting microaggressions and they don't know it, because of their community and the way they were brought up. I think we've all kind of seen that. So how do us in our seat, where we're kind of the culture champions, and we're the ones trying to make this a great place to work and really focus on employee experience and bring the right people in, and how do we transfer this knowledge of these elements and actually turn that into action? What are some tactics or some steps that you would recommend for us to start to think about, or some actions that we can start to do to reflect really what the spirit of work can be?
Well, I think the first thing is to accept people from where they're at, rather than trying to change them into who you think they should be or what they should be doing. So it's like, I can accept that that's the way you're feeling right now, but that doesn't mean you have to act on it, right? I can accept that this is upsetting for you. I'd probably be upset too. Did I get that right? So it's about accepting and then using a verifying question afterwards that usually lowers people's defenses and helps them to start thinking and autocorrecting. Another thing you can use is to just name what you think the emotion is that they're feeling. I think you're feeling really frustrated right now. Did I get that right? And they will automatically tell you either, yes, I'm so frustrated. And then they'll tell you what it is. And then they get it off their chest and then they're done. And they start regulating because they've already named it. Or they'll say, no, that's not it at all. I'm so upset because my teenage son mouthed me off when I was leaving for work this morning, and I'm still mad about it. It's 3 hours ago, right? So they may not tell you all of that, but I'm just giving you as an example to ask, to name what you think the emotion is, and then say, did I get that right? It puts you in a position of humility and that you're listening and paying attention, and then they can correct you and they settle down. So I think that's one of the things that those are some strategies that can be helpful. I also use in the book something that's not from me. It's from the Virtues Project, but it's called a virtues sequence, and using the language of virtues at work. And so, like when you start telling people, wow, that was just so thoughtful of you, and I really appreciated your generosity, or how can you show courage? I know you did it yesterday and it's tough, but and in your shoes, I'd have a hard time, but how can you show courage? I know you've got it. I know you're resilient. That's all virtues, 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 virtues. People don't have a virtues vocabulary, emotions vocabulary, and they don't have a descriptive vocabulary. So they can't name anything that's going on inside of them. And that's why they're volatile. So if you can help them with any of those three pieces, then they start self-correcting. And it's not really your job to correct them. It's just your job to create that kind of environment where they can do it themselves. So there's that. The virtues sequence is truth, love, justice, unity, peace, and abundance. So usually people go, oh, if we just equally distribute stuff, everybody's going to be happy. So you're starting at the top with abundance, but that's the last piece of the puzzle. The first one is you have to find out what the truth of the situation is. You usually can't find that out unless you've checked with all the parties and tried to do a 360 to find out what's actually happening, what's really going on. And that even to say to somebody, are you sure that this is true for you right now? Is this true for this situation? Just asking those kinds of probing questions. And the other thing is love, which is the idea that nobody's going to care about anybody else in the organization if they don't care about them. Like they won't care about anything or anybody unless they feel some kind of a bond, some kind of a connection with them. So find out the truth. And if you want to, truth and love then lead to justice, because then you're going to want to make sure that people are treated equitably and that nobody gets the short end of the stick, because you're coming from a truth and love basis. And once you've got justice, you can move to unity. But you don't get to unity if you have injustice. You don't say kiss and make up. Like, let's say you've got somebody who's been bullied in the workplace. You don't take those two people in to your office and say, okay, now let's just talk it out and kiss and make up, because they're in a different power differential. So the person who's abusing the power can use that whole scenario to make everything worse. So you can't get to unity if you don't have justice. So then again, you'd need to go back and talk to each person separately, which HR people are really good at. Talk to each person separately, find out the situation, and then find out what would one thing that could be brought together, and then how can the victim be protected, but also find agency, and how can the bully find out what do they really need, and that they feel they need to bully other people, and then how can they start auto-correcting their behavior? And if they can't, what do you need to put in place? So that it's a different approach, because when you're taking it from that perspective of the virtue sequence, which is present in all the writings of all of the world religions, in exactly that order. So there's got to be some wisdom to it, or it wouldn't have existed for 6,000 years. So then from unity comes peace. So you feel peace when people are united and you're working towards unity of purpose, but it's not unity in conformity. It's unity of purpose with diversity of contribution. And then out of that comes abundance. It's a natural outcome. So that means that your company profits. I don't know if that makes sense, because that's really more of I suppose, a theoretical approach. But it really, if you can look at a situation and go, okay, what's missing here? Is it justice? Is it truth? And you figure out where it is on the sequence, on the scale, and then you'll go, okay, if it's truth, then we got to start from square one.
If anybody was actually watching this podcast, because this is obviously an audio only format, you would see the wheels turning in my head, because what's so fascinating, I'm sitting here, first of all, I'm just thinking, yes, like on all of these things, this just makes perfect sense. And I'm going back to kind of what we've talked about a little bit, is going back to kind of the language and kind of naming the actual virtues. to me, I just think is so powerful. And what, the context that I'm thinking about that in is, let's just use this scenario. Let's say that I'm working through a workplace harassment investigation, and I do have a victim and a harasser, and we've been taught, some of us, learned the hard way. Myself, there wasn't a class on how do you conduct a harassment investigation in college. You stumble through it. You have maybe a couple trainings from your employer, and then you're off to the races. Like, good luck. Don't screw it up, right? Don't get us sued. That's basically the training. But by thinking about it in the framework of what you just described, truth, love, justice, unity, I'm missing one.
Peace and
abundance. To me, it's like, now you've got a framework, so obviously there's rules that you need to follow as it relates to conducting an investigation. But if you follow it in the context of the virtue that you are trying to achieve in each step of that investigation, what a powerful framework to ensure that you make the right decision for your culture and for that person. And I think all of us who have ever been through that scenario know this is hard. This is really, really hard to get correct. And so, more often than not, it's unclear as to what the right answer is. A lot of times it's a judgment call, and a lot of times it falls on HR's desk, but if we can take a step back and feel confident that we follow these virtues, then we can sleep at night.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think
hopefully our employees can too.
Yeah, no, you totally get it. It's really wonderful to hear you get that so quickly. Can I tell you a manufacturing story
Please.
So this is one of the stories that's in the book. So it's a story about a plant manager who, he said, I don't need to consult anybody else, because I'm the one with the education and the experience here. That's why I have this job and this title. And I know you're rolling your eyes. People can't see that. So I said, well, hey, we're doing a course together here. So, and you have to consult because we're on the communications unit, and you have to ask people their opinion and gather feedback, because that's the goal of this particular unit, right? So you're going to have to do something. He says, okay. Well, I've got this rollout project coming up, and I'm just going to tell them about it. I've got a PowerPoint. I'll tell my middle managers about it, and then they can take it from there. So he starts to go through this presentation with these middle managers, and one person says, can I stop you for a minute? And within about 10 minutes, they'd identified 11 flaws to his plan. And he was absolutely flabbergasted, because he didn't think he needed anyone, because he figured he was the sum of all knowledge, apparently. So, but he was a nice guy. It's just he was used to being right and having other people following his orders all the time, and not used to listening to them or gathering feedback. So incorrect data leads to incorrect decisions, right? So when he had got that from them, he said, okay, so what do you think we should do next? Which I think was a brilliant and very humble approach. And they said, well, we should talk to our people about it. And he said, well, that's a bad idea, because most of them don't even speak English properly. So how are you going to understand them? So right away switched back into his default mode of, I know what I'm doing, they don't. And they said, well, no, we've got ways to work around that. We've got people who can translate, and let us just give us a week to get some feedback, and we'll come back to you with it. So we did, and they found another 10 problems with the rollout plan, and they also had suggestions for how to fix it. So by the time it got back to the plant manager, the rollout plan was pretty flawless, because they'd had many minds, many hearts, many souls, and many bodies saying, this is going to hurt. Can we do it this way instead? Talking. And so it was really exciting to see what happened. And they discovered two unexpected things. One was, why was the plant not doing something to help people improve their English? Because people stay at a very low level, and they can't participate in anything if they can't speak the language of the country, right? And the second one was, people didn't know what the numbers were that they were asked to collect. They wouldn't know what they were for, what they were used from. So one of the supervisors said, well, I'll just explain it to everybody. So he did. He explained it to them and showed them and all the employees got very excited, because they realized they could control the numbers. So they started to do things like set themselves a goal, like no damage leaving from shipping, like no rework. Like they started setting these goals for themselves, because they knew what they were doing. They had the knowledge to put it into place. And they were so excited about it, they called their family members and friends and other plants of the same company and taught them how to do it. And so The plant manager was all excited. He said, this is the best results we've ever had. And it's so great. And all I did was gather feedback and listen to what they had to say. And it wasn't hard for me to do. This was so great. Everybody's excited. And then guess what happened? The company fired me.
Uh-oh.
Because they realized that with all these people having more knowledge and changing their behavior, they were going to have to do the same thing. And they didn't want to. So I'm telling you this because it's not like the book is like all these rosy pictures and this is like clouds in the sky and everybody's happy. It's do this and it's going to start seeing results, but you're likely going to have some problems along the way and you may not be able to solve them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're going to feel better about it. And this plant manager felt a lot better about the way he was running things. His people were happier. Everybody had now a cutting edge job skill that they didn't have before that also made them more valuable to the company. And if the company didn't recognize it, they could go somewhere else because now they have that skill, right? So they didn't lose, but they did lose because really the whole company could have gone to that next level.
That's really interesting. And I think on the macro level, we're seeing a lot of things very similar to that, where you've got organizations who have been really demanded to change, from an employee base. I mean, I can't tell you how many headlines I've seen recently where, employees are demanding this from this employer and employers are demanding that from that employer. And, I view that as, first of all, it's like, they should be asking for things that they would like, but it's also, I think, indicative of the challenge that many organizations have, which is sometimes it's really hard to change, especially if you have, leadership teams, HR people included that don't listen and don't follow some of these tenets and
well, it's because it doesn't feel safe to them. They feel threatened.
Right.
They feel threatened. So, and that's why the S.W.E.L model is so important.
Right.
Because what feels unsafe about this for me? What would make it feel safer for me to move forward? What would be one step that would be safe for me to take?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. I think, I think it's a really powerful story. But I think it's a really interesting example. And I can certainly, I work in manufacturing, so I understand that response. Well, I have this degree and I know how to do it, so that's let me do my job.
Well,
I've heard that a few times.
He was doing his job, but it was better when he started working with the people. That's why they say two heads are better than one. Well, you put all the heads together towards a united purpose. They're excited. They were so excited to have been asked.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. But I do think it's also, it's a great example of how, like in that story, I just think, well, geez, how could I have prevented that termination? How could I have fostered that type of collaboration? Because, so often human resources professionals fall into that camp of the, kind of that feedback mechanism to upper management, or sometimes we're gatekeepers to what information finds its way onto somebody's desk. And so it's, and I don't know the exact situation there, but I do think, geez, if there would have been somebody in human resources that was kind of touting the actions that were being taken and the employee engagement that was occurring and some of the productivity metrics that were happening and the actual, talking about the abundance that was occurring because of the approach, could that have prompted a different action, or could that have prevented, somebody getting in trouble? And I do think that is part of our job as we think about, to what your book is talking about here. How does HR actually create a soul sustaining workplace culture and an environment for that to thrive and for those types of leaders to thrive? Because I think every listener right now is thinking, man, I wish I wonder if I can hire that plant manager. Do you have like, that sounds great. I'd love for people to get employees engaged. And
their plant managers are probably capable of doing it. They just need someone to spark it. Right. So
there you go.
Maybe they should hire me instead.
There you go. All right. So that's a perfect place to leave it. I think if you take anything away, be the spark. and The Spirit of Work. I think just some really great pieces of advice. I do want to shift gears. I'm fascinated to hear your responses to the Rebel HR Flash Round. So we're gonna shift into the Rebel HR Flash Round. Here comes the first question: where does HR need to rebel?
Stop thinking that information or knowledge change behavior, and instead, listening, encouragement, and challenge, appropriate challenge, are a better approach.
I love that. Not just knowledge. It's about what you do with it, right?
Knowledge is helpful because it provides a safe platform to start from, but it doesn't help if you stay there, because then you just get stuck in, I don't have to do anything because I already know it, which is never true.
Right. All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
Well, I'm going to recommend Adam Grant, who's a social psychologist. I'm just about finished listening to his book right now called Think Again, which is just tremendous. And if you want to know how to change behavior, this is the book for you. It's so good. Shout out to Adam Grant. I hope I get to meet him someday because he's one of my writer heroes. That book, Think Again, all his books are great, but this is the most recent one is super good. He talks about how you need to rethink yourself. And then how do you help others to do that? And then how do you help people who are diametrically opposed to you come to a position of unity of thought? It's really good.
He's got some great content. I think that's the second recommendation in a row for Adam Grant. So if you're a listener and you haven't picked up an Adam Grant book or listened to his podcast or just follow him on social, there's great content there. I am going to put out a plug here for the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. It's Marie's podcast. If I guarantee you that it'll be worth your while if you're looking for a new podcast recommendation, that is also out there. So
thank you.
And last question here: how can our listeners connect with you?
Well, they can always connect with me on LinkedIn. So Marie Gervais, Leaders Training. That's leader training is that's the second part. And because there are lots of Marie Gervais out there. And they can also go to my website, which is shiftworkplace.com. And if they're interested in the book, they just go to the book tab, and then all of the directories where there's a direct link to the book will be there.
Perfect. We will have all that information in the show notes. So open up your podcast player, click right in, get connected. Marie, I just want to thank you again. Just absolutely wonderful contact. I'm with you. I'm just thinking yes to everything you're saying. So I appreciate you putting the book out there, and I guarantee that our listeners took a lot away from it this week. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Most appreciated your listening ear and your great questions.
Thanks, Marie. All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.